Thank you, Brian. Hello, everyone. My name is Ken Spiro. I am the CEO and founder of School Sims, formerly Ed Leadership Sims, for those of you who have been following along. Welcome. It is great to see you all, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're looking forward to sharing with you our newest simulation on managing diversity in a growing community, which we'll get to momentarily. For those of you who aren't as familiar with simulation, just real quickly, our operating premise is that experience is the best teacher. We know that, especially when it comes to leadership, which is highly contextual. And what we look to do is, in essence, use simulation to manufacture experience, or if you will, safe experience, because as you all know, I don't need to tell you that the School of Hard Knocks, when it comes to school leadership, is really rather painful and expensive. And the opportunity to actually practice making decisions in complex issues in which you have stakeholders who often have demands that are exclusive of each other, and frankly, that often each one is more irrational than the next. Practicing is important, and that's what simulations are really designed to do. So we are delighted to be able to have Dr. Trent Grenmeyer with us today, who was our collaborator in the development of this simulation, and I will leave it to him to introduce that. But for those of you who are not familiar with Dr. Grundmeyer, he was the youngest high school principal in Iowa history at the age of 25. He has his PhD in educational leadership from Iowa State University. He was the Iowa Secondary Principal of the Year in 2013. He has led 2 trips to Finland to study education, so looking outside of our borders, and takes leaders to Toronto annually. He has been published in multiple journals on leadership, technology, and education reform efforts, and he currently serves as an associate professor for ed leadership at Drake University in Des Moines. And he has his own company, Grundmeyer Leader Services, where focusing on the hiring of superintendents and principals around the Midwest. So when we talk about somebody who's actually been there, who's done that, who's thought about it, we feel like we're in pretty good hands. So I'll turn it over to you, Trent. It's all yours.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate that very much. And the introduction, we're putting the bar a little bit too high, so I need to knock that down a little bit here as we get started today. But thanks for the opportunity. I want to mention, we'll do some introductions here in a moment. Can everybody hear me okay? We good? I know we get this Zoom fatigue thing going on, but especially over lunch here, putting me on the hot seat. But what I want to reassure you right up front here is that this is not going to be maybe the typical Zoom that you sit on where you're listening to a presentation. If you're thinking you're going to do something else today during this Zoom, you're going to be disappointed, because we're going to engage you in the actual new simulation here about boundarying, and I think you will very much enjoy the experience today. I want to mention as we get started, this simulation came about because of my role at the university. I teach both a master's level and a superintendent level school law classes. I also teach teacher evaluation and a technology and leadership doctorate class. But I have found that even before I got connected with Ken, I have found that simulations, whether they're in person or using technologies like School Sims, are some of the best teachers, as Ken alluded to there in the introduction. So when I taught boundarying and segregations in a textbook or out of a textbook and tried to ask students to apply that in some of my coursework, I found that to be very difficult. Students didn't really understand that segregation still existed. They didn't understand the complexities of rebounding issues when I turn on the news and see a school district that was trying to rebounding and hundreds of parents showing up in the auditorium, and how big of a deal it really was. I just couldn't have them understand the gravity of both of those key topics. And so I approached Ken probably a couple years ago about developing a simulation like this. And since then, we've really tried to refine and flesh out the realistic details that could benefit school leaders in thinking about both rebounding that could lead to segregation type issues and scenarios. And so I think you're going to see today the fruits of our labor and how this simulation itself, which again is hot off the press, could benefit and help teach students and really have them apply some of the complex issues like segregation and boundary. That was my initial purpose. So I just wanted to share that with you before we dig into the simulation and let you know where it came from. With that being said, I want to just get to know the audience a little bit. We won't take time necessarily with so many people on the call to do introductions, but maybe a thumbs up, a wave, or a one of those emojis, thumbs up. If you are somebody who is serving in K-12 right now on the call today. K-12 folks? Okay. And how about folks that are in higher ed positions? Okay, fairly even. And anybody that is in perhaps an area education agency or another nonprofit or outside agency supporting schools, K-12 or higher ed?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. I'd say about a third of each, which is great. I will try to give you some practical tips and scenarios about how I actually teach and use these in my classes, so that hopefully that's helpful and gives you some strategies and ideas if you leverage these yourselves. So thanks for the opportunity again, and look forward to sharing this sim. Again, it's hot off the press, finished here recently, and even more videos to finish and embed in the simulation moving forward. But excited to share this one that's titled Managing Diversity in a Growing Community. So let's go ahead and jump in, and I'm going to transition my slides so you can see the sim itself, which I will keep on the screen, but I want to forewarn you that we will use everything from chats to what we just did, thumbs up emoji or a visual. I have the poll set up today, so I will get feedback through the poll, discussion boards, and different scenarios like that I will engage you with today. So here's the simulation. Let's go ahead and get started, and you will see it firsthand.
As in real life, you will not be able to go back in time during the simulation. There is no back button. You may only move forward. If you need to exit the simulation and return, you may restart or continue from where you left off. For a description of the buttons below, select the question mark button, which will display an interface overview page in a separate browser tab. Finally, keep moving forward by selecting the next button to the lower right.
And we will do that, but I just want to demo here that this question mark here, when you do click on that, it gives you just an overview of the navigation buttons. Over time, you do this a few times, you certainly don't even have to leverage this, but perhaps if you're facilitating this for the first time, you'd want to print or download those navigation tools. So we will proceed.
In this simulation, we've created a dashboard to show how your decisions impact parent, board, city council, and staff satisfaction. Select the blue information button to see dashboard item names. The colors will change from time to time based on your choices. Green suggests that you are managing them well. Yellow means not so well. And red, well,
we don't want to necessarily get to that red point, right? But I love this feature that they have built in the simulations, because I think it makes them even more real. And so I will pause as we go through this simulation and bring to the students' attention, bring to your attention today, a notation about, the board maybe is not satisfied, and oh, by the way, they're your boss, versus balancing that with staff, the council, city council in this situation, and parents. Now, keep in mind, we don't have students on that, so this isn't all-encompassing, and we could certainly engage other people and monitor their stress and satisfaction as well. But I think this feature, this dashboard feature throughout the sim, you're going to see makes the simulation very real.
in this simulation, you're the superintendent of the Ridge Valley School District, which is a progressive district on the outskirts of a metropolitan area. There are approximately 4,400 students in the district, currently served by 5 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and a large high school. The community has a unique student demographic due to a handful of major businesses in town that provide jobs for most of the citizens. The community's population growth rate over the past 5 years has been the highest in the region due to tax incentives being offered to businesses willing to locate in or near the city, as well as reduced impact fees for new home construction within the city limits.
So now we're kind of getting, setting the stage for the scenario, and hopefully you and others can consider how this relates to your community. Maybe it's slightly different, but this is the kind of putting you in the hot spot. And while we're here, I want to go down to this bottom icon here that looks like two people. I'm going to click on that because this highlights some of the key players in this particular simulation that we can always go back to if we want to reference them again. But I just want you to know here, this first gentleman in the sim today is actually the mayor, John Stockton, mayor of Ridge Valley for the last 4 years. He's elected on the promise to keep property taxes low, engage with the community before making changes, and ensure the quality of education in the community. Always be found chatting in the community, businesses, and academic leaders, and he's got a proactive leadership style. So just want to mention him. This Melissa Johnson, a key player in the sim as well. She's title is a senior director of admissions. Promoted with great care national and moved to Ridge Valley from a metro city, serving the local hospital. And remember, that's a major employer in town. She's excited for the growth opportunities and a slower pace in this community, and has decided to take a leadership role in the community and get involved in a variety of different roles. She's got a BA in economics, and her opinion is heard and considered by many people, which will come into play later. Sam Gallegos has served as the county sheriff, key person in the simulation here. Has managed to keep law enforcement well within the budgets the past 4 years, and growth has accelerated, and socioeconomic conditions have shifted, causing tension a little bit in the community, which has gradually increased. And again, that is part of setting the stage in this particular simulation. And then last, let's meet this Levon Jackson. Dr. Jackson served, she's the school board president, by the way, served as a school board member in Metropolitan for 4 years before her election to the board in Ridge Valley last year. So she's just been on the board over a year. Throughout her tenure in Minneapolis, she was a voice against the growing cost of busing, economic and social. She worked closely with school administrators to overall hiring practices, which led to improved performance and graduation rates. So you see some of her passions there. Note that rumors exist that relationships are strained with the current board a little bit. Always, or maybe not a great place to be as the superintendent as you're looking at boundary issues, but that is the facts of the scenario. So those are key people you're going to meet throughout the simulation here.
One of the major employers in the district is a technology engineering company that supplies software solutions for other businesses around the globe and employs primarily engineers and software developers. The average annual income for employees of this company is $115,000. Another major business is the local casino that employs 420 workers with an average annual income of $36,000. The hospital in town is well known in the area and a very large employer with 1,600 employees with salaries ranging from $22,000 to $620,000. Other local restaurants, stores, and service businesses employ citizens of the community. The unemployment rate in Ridge Valley is minimal, and the economy is currently very good.
Okay, so a little bit more information about the area. You kind of get a sense of the larger communities in the school district, which are probably similar to a lot of your communities with the hospital and technology companies. And you can see there too, the average wages of folks varying a great degree from 22,000 to 620.
With increased permits to build new homes on the developing west side of town, the school district is considering adding another elementary school. In preparation to do so, the district publicly shared that plans are underway to establish new boundaries. This has resulted in upset parents. Many are concerned because their children may have to be bused to an elementary school farther away from their current elementary school. The problem is that if you do not reboundary the district, some schools will be 70% free reduced lunches, with others under 10%. You're worried about the growing financial segregation between the various buildings in your district. Although the free reduced lunch status of students is not directly related to race, there is an increasing number of minority students who qualify for free and/or reduced lunch. Click here for more information about the National School Lunch Program.
Now, this is where I think the simulation really gets real, right? You got boundary issues. You got parents that, it's a neighborhood school, but now all of a sudden my child might have to be bused to a school further away and isn't necessarily in my neighborhood. But the district is looking at the potential segregation around free and reduced lunch status. And if they don't bus students or think about rebounding, you got a real issue on your hands about the segregation and perhaps discrepancies in the student population here. So now you can see kind of the tug or the issue at hand as this simulation kind of grows more complex. Just quick pause here and show of hands, and maybe visually. How many of you have actually on the call today have been through a rebounding situation, either as a parent or a school leader? So quite a few people, which is very interesting. And I want to gauge the realistic approach to this. I'm glad nobody had a nervous breakdown when I just asked that question or had flashbacks either. So you all survived it, which is good. And that's what but these scenarios, in my experience, can be career killers if they're not handled correctly. Superintendent, even if they do handle it correctly, in some cases, they may be updating their resume and looking for a new job because you can't make half the patrons, let alone staff, happy. So pretty realistic scenario that can be a make or break for school leaders and divide a community as well.
You feel tension growing in the community and you'd like to get in front of this issue. So you begin listing preemptive actions you might take. From this list, which course of action will you pursue first?
So here's our first choice in this simulation, right? You're starting the conversation around rebounding in the district and with the board. You know you have potential segregation issues with the student population. We haven't even talked about staff yet. But this question is asking us, forcing us to think about where would we start here? And I want to acknowledge right away as we work through these, perhaps this isn't the best answer. Perhaps there's other options on here as well, or not the perfect answer. That is a teachable opportunity for, at least when I teach this with students, they say, I don't like any of those options. And I say, well, tell me what you would do differently and negotiate that. So the options that we have in the list here is not to publicly comment yet. And there's pros and cons to that, obviously. We could work with staff to develop a communication plan and strategy. And, one of the things I like about this option is your staff is probably one of the larger employers in the community. And so if you do clarify and get to your staff, perhaps they can help clarify in your community the facts around rebounding. You can work with the community leadership to develop a marketing strategy, marketing meaning around how you're going to rebound. You can work through the PTA to quell any parent concerns with the understanding that, not everybody's part of the PTA, but they could help get information out there. Or you could work with the school board to develop a strategy for the impending boundary modifications. So I want you to consider each of those, certainly pros and cons to all of them. And I'm going to launch a quick poll here. And I'm just going to ask you to pick number 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. We don't have a number 6 necessarily in this scenario. So if you will, pick what option you think is best at this point in the scenario. So I'm going to launch this poll quick, and we'll see what the group wants to select. Give it a few more moments. 19 of 26 have voted so far. Looks like option 2 and option 9 are, I'm sorry, option 2 or option 5 here are our top vote getters. Anybody else going to weigh in? I like to use the poll option in class when you want a more quick response. I feel in some cases it's better to allow for discussion. So if I'm constantly balancing, the response and or the teaching opportunities with each question. But on this one, I think a poll is appropriate, and then we'll talk about next steps. So it looks like just very closely here, our two options that were our top vote getters were option 2 and option 5. So let's go back to the simulation here. And option 2 was work with the staff to develop a communication plan and strategy, which is not a bad option. And option 5 was to work with the local school board. So we'll go with the majority on this one and choose option 5 and see what our consequences are from here.
You've decided to work with the school board to develop communication plans for impending boundary modifications. You hope that their perspectives and experience will help you navigate what are bound to become turbulent waters. During your meeting, several of the board members voiced concerns regarding the need for redistricting, and others argue that it's been needed for some time now. You sense a lack of unity on the board and quickly realize that they may present more problems than solutions. In the hope of increasing clarity and focus, you decide to visit principals in the schools most likely impacted by boundary modifications and gather their insights.
Okay, so now we know that we got the board a little bit divided here, even though that was our option, which we got a little bit of an insight to when we did the introductions with the key people and that board president. But again, you've picked this choice, and so you're going to try to be intentional about working with the board, getting their support as you reboundary the district.
You've spent the morning visiting 3 of your 5 elementary principals regarding the growing disparity in their student demographics. It seems that they are already fielding calls regarding rumored changes, and each voices their concern about community support for boundary modifications. Returning to your office, you find a pile of missed call notes. And as you scan through them, it appears that virtually all of them are from parents. It appears that your fears associated with this becoming a contentious issue are coming to fruition. It doesn't look like you're going to catch a break on this one.
And you wish you did, right? Sim over. You did everything right. Let's just take a new job. But that's not an option on this one. And so again, gets a little more real here. Notice that we don't have the scorecard, the dashboard up in the right yet, but you will see it soon.
To complicate things, a new meatpacking plant was just approved by the City Council with tax incentives. The new business will bring another 400 blue-collar jobs with an average pay of $15 per hour. You and other community leaders know that these jobs will entice Hispanic families to your community and may require English language learner services from the school district. Although its location has already been approved and the building is expected to start right away, there have been small protests in the community at public events and city council meetings against this new business and the Hispanic population expected to fill the new jobs.
Okay, so again, a lot of people can relate to this, whether it's a meat packing plant or some sort of other business that may come to town that, others maybe not protest, but maybe are not excited about coming and diversifying the community here.
As you gather more information to assist in identifying viable options, you focus on community growth. It's important to know where the growth is taking place and how much to anticipate. What data points are most helpful to identify new residents to your community, where they will locate, and consequently, new student additions to the population. From the list below, select the 4 that are the highest priority to you.
Now for this one, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, so there's lots of other things we could put on here to consider. But I'm just going to open this one up for discussion to the larger group. It's asking us to select maybe 4 that are high priority to consider about which data points are important to forecast the growth in the community. And so I will tell you one as a school leader that we used to track very closely is the first one here, and that's the new building permits for homes. What that doesn't tell you is how many kids that new homeowner may have, right? So it's not an absolute or 100% concrete option, but it's certainly one to gauge the growth in a potential district. So I'll give you that one. Building permits was one that was helpful as a school leader for me, but I'm going to open it up now and suggest or look for feedback. What other ones do you think would be most helpful to gauge growth in Ridge Valley here? Send me a chat or unmute and speak up if you don't mind.
There we go. I would say community population projections, including student enrollment projections.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of validity, especially if this is sometimes from an outside third-party vendor provider, because there's some objectivity to those projections. So great point.
You know, while I think the building permits do offer some interesting insight, if a number of the folks coming into a number of the projected folks coming into the community are at the lower end of the salary scale, I don't know how many new homes are going to be reflected in that data. So I would probably also look at free and reduced lunch applications, and that might be one important indicator.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of this, right? You brought something up somebody else might not even be thinking about in regard to new home permits or a rationale for why that might not be overly accurate. But one thing we could all certainly agree is that you can't just look at one data point for this to project growth, right? You should be looking at multiple. So great point on that. I'm going to check free and reduced lunch applications and watch the chat here. Population projections. Another one I'm seeing often is open enrollment requests. Probably a good indication of how many new students are potentially coming to your district. One question I see in the chat is, would the data on new jobs show us what the salary range of those jobs are? And I think the answer to that is that they may, but you'd have to dig a little bit deeper to know exactly, you know, what type of jobs and how many with each organization. I'm not sure that data would be in one spot. It might be business to business, but perhaps the Chamber of Commerce or the city could provide information to the school district about data and salary ranges. Okay, so we've picked 4. I think there are good rationale for all of those 4. And again, there could be potentially others. So if I was facilitating this with my students, I'd say, what else should we be paying attention to?
Are there other data points or potential key indicators not included in the list you just reviewed that you feel should be reviewed? List as many as you can in the box below within 3 minutes.
Now, this is not meant to be a, you know, hurry up and see who the fastest typer is. But it is meant to be a catch-all about, hey, let's have a discussion about what else should you be paying attention to. So I'm going to open it back up to the group and say, what other indicators should we be tracking as the school superintendent to monitor and track growth for the district? Chat or unmute and give me some feedback if you will. I see birth rates already. Public transportation, applications, I'm assuming. What else? Watching the chat here, I see timeline of new jobs or when they're starting. Very important, because if they're starting mid-year, you can anticipate new students mid-year, right? Versus maybe summer and at the start of the academic year. Tax levy or rates, good point. Both property tax, commercial tax. Say SPED, service requests. Good. So that's another good list that was not on our previous options. And so again, some teachable moments here on some things that perhaps students or folks that are engaged in this sim hadn't even thought about, but could apply when this scenario comes up for them. So let's move ahead and see what's next in this simulation.
You receive a call from the Sheriff's Department. Superintendent, this is Sheriff Gallegos. I thought it best to give you a courtesy call to let you know that a permit has been issued for a demonstration or rally at the park just down the street from the district offices tomorrow morning. The purpose of the rally, as listed in the permit application, is to gather support to fight the setting of new school boundaries. In the application, they estimated a crowd of 400, so heads up. This is mushrooming very quickly.
Just what you wanted, right? Usually these come on a Friday afternoon, right? Perhaps this one isn't on a Friday afternoon, but nonetheless, you can see there's a little bit of tension growing. Luckily, you have a good relationship with your sheriff, and you got a little bit of a heads up, but now complicates things to decide how to handle it.
Community planners have invited you to the next Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to discuss where the new elementary school should be located. You are pleased to be part of these meetings and understand that reconsidering boundaries is important to bring equity to the various buildings throughout your district. Besides students and parents, you know that staff will also prefer to work closer to their homes. Presently, most of the district staff members live in the community and work within 3 miles of their homes.
So that's some interesting information. Presently, most of the staff, because we haven't talked much about staff now, but now we bring staff into play here. And most of them live within 3 miles of where they work. Also keeping in mind that a lot of staff are going to have children potentially that go to the district as well. So that will complicate some of our next steps and options in regard to the boundary.
You plan to spend time this morning preparing for an afternoon meeting with Ridge Valley's Planning and Zoning Commission, but have spent most of the time taking calls from concerned parents. As you leave the building for your appointment, you're confronted in the parking lot by a small group brandishing signs that complain of busing, a choice that has not yet been made. Wow, is this preemptive or what? Your meeting with Planning and Zoning begins with a healthy debate over 2 potential location options for the new school. Several members of the commission voiced strong opposition to Parcel A, the parcel which is currently zoned as the primary site for another school, because the recently approved meatpacking plant will now be quite close. They suggest rezoning a residential parcel, Parcel B, and placing the school there. Several other members remind the council of the difficulty they had getting agreement from a resident owner for the residential zoning of Parcel B. It's currently agricultural land in the Greenbelt. These members suggest that changing it again will probably reopen a real can of worms. After extensive and vigorous debate, the commission decides to propose both options to the city council and let them decide. You recognize the signs of a potential tempest.
So here we go, letting the city council decide, and they're certainly going to want input from the superintendent, which is going to make a big difference for the school district.
The Planning and Zoning Commission has provided the City Council with 2 hotly debated options, and the Council now requests that you meet with them. You realize that both options are bound to result in some level of pushback. What will you recommend to the City Council?
Okay, so Mr. and Mrs. Superintendent, they want your recommendation here. keeping in mind that initially it was the parcel A, and then, but again, it's by close to a meat packing plant, which people were concerned with. And then parcel B is some rural land that could be developed, but the landowner was not obviously keen on that. So I'm going to pop up a poll again and ask you to weigh in with approving parcel A, option 1, which was previously zoned. Again, this is your recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission for them to consider rezoning parcel B, allow the council to decide and not really making a recommendation, or encouraging them to simply open it up for public comment. So poll should be back open. What is the best option? 1, 2, 3, or 4 for you to recommend? This is interesting. We have 56% going with option 4 and 31% with option 2, with votes also for 1 and 3. So we don't have clear direction here from the group, which is just fine. There's certainly pros and cons to negotiate on and any of these options, but as the district superintendent, you can't waver on what you're going to recommend either to the council. So it looks like option 4 here with almost 60% is the option of the majority. So we'll take the democratic approach here and click option 4 and see what the council wants to do with opening this up for public comment.
Following your recommendation, the council gets very quiet. Several place their heads in their hands, and the mayor smiles, shakes his head, rocks back in his chair, and says, even though it's probably the right thing to do, it's going to be the most painful and extended path to a solution. I hope you're up for this.
Just what you wanted them to say, right? Now I want to pause right here and look up at our dashboard, because I think this is a pivotal one and why I like the dashboard. So right now our parents, again, because we're talking with the city and probably no major decisions have been made, are still moderately satisfied with where the district's at. Our board is still satisfied. Our city council satisfaction has declined, and our staff satisfaction still moderate. So let's keep an eye on that as we continue to evolve and make decisions here.
You contact a neighboring superintendent to talk with her about the new boundary process they conducted a few years ago. You learn that they had similar challenges. She suggests that you include as many people as possible in the review and recommendations process for new boundaries. You consider possibly adding more working groups to look at the proposed changes. The superintendent tells you that they also ask questions like, what factors would you consider in recommending the board reset the new district boundaries? And what boundary option would be best to promote a positive climate for students and staff around the district? What other questions might you ask people as you review the recommendation? Type your responses in the box below.
Now, I like this because we're at a pivotal point in the simulation where we're making recommendations and working with the city council and your school board, but you also have this opportunity to learn from somebody who's lived this, perhaps an area superintendent. If I'm doing this with students in a school law class, I'm going to say, hey, have you talked to your mentor in the field? If they've had an experience like this, what questions might you learn or ask them? So I'm actually going to take about 3 or 4 minutes here and move you into some breakout rooms and ask you to think about if you had the chance to call or network with area superintendents that have lived the rebounding experience. I know that's some of you on this call, to think about what other key questions should be asked at this point in the simulation. So 3 or 4 minutes. And please post any key questions in the chat, and I will add them to this slide. When you get in your breakout rooms, by the way, if you want to just do a brief introduction about who you are, that's great. But again, I'm going to keep this to 3 or 4 minutes, and we'll look for those key questions in the chat.
Hello.
Hello, how you doing? All right.
Hi, I've never delved into this topic. I'm an intern for the School of Social Work at Columbia, and I'm interning at PS 308 in Brooklyn. So I'm not really sure about this topic, just FYI. I'm learning.
Same here. I'm a licensed school administrator, but I'm working as a teacher. I haven't got promoted yet or anything, so I'm here to learn. I'm also an EC teacher for high school. So this is new to me as well. We'll learn together, huh?
I'm a former superintendent in New Jersey, retired. I'm now teaching online through Liberty University in Virginia, and looking to embed simulations in a couple of school community relations courses that I'm teaching. I went through a demographic committee. The population growth was not increasing as had been projected, so we took no action as a result of our research, but it was a hot topic. It was a hot topic. Even with us knowing that the phase-in of the buildings and the impact would be 7 to 10 years, and so we wouldn't have to do anything as a district till 5, 6 years down the road. It prior to me getting there, it brought out a ton of parents and the city committee and everybody, and oh boy.
Must have been a headache, but you survived it.
Actually, that part of it was before I got there, and then I took the committee through a whole research thing, and they said, "Oh, so we're not going to have an impact for 5, 6 years," and we said, "Yeah." So, we could still plan, but and then I retired.
Okay.
Do you have any input about what other key questions we could be asking up until this point?
Well, I thought the data points were really interesting about the projections, because that's really what you would want to do. I mean, the services, somebody brought up special ed, and then ELL was mentioned earlier on too. That impact to staffing is going to be important. In terms of the recommendations of the actual school location, I would think you'd want to get the PTAs and the parents and the staff involved in that communication and that conversation, as to, since they're the ones most affected by the location.
Okay. Great. Okay. Oh, Brian. I see there's Brian there too.
I thought it was really interesting that with the recommendation to go to let the city council, but board satisfaction was really high. They're like, woo!
No, right. They don't have to handle that. That's great. All right. Great. Is Brian there? No.
I know Brian works with the simulation group.
Oh, okay.
Gotcha. So he may be supervising us or something.
Oh, okay then. Good to know. All right.
What states are you folks in?
I'm from New York, but I live in North Carolina now.
I'm in Brooklyn. I just moved here from California for school. So
great. That's good. All right.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you all. How's retirement, Dr. McGon?
It's great in the sense that I don't have to make parent phone calls, and I don't have a board of ed that I have to worry about, or any of those kind of things. So I'm working at a charter school. Actually, I work in curriculum and instruction, so I don't have to deal with the discipline. I don't have to deal with the parents, and
you're still busy, man.
I'm busy.
Yeah.
A good busy.
All right.
And I love teaching in the university level. I love that.
That's great. That's great. All right. Do you think we should leave the room?
Can we?
Go back. Oh, I see this leave the room here. I wonder if
Oh,
we
leave
still
the room.
back. Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye. Okay.
Did it kicked? Oh, my bad.
Welcome back, everybody.
Let me mute myself.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I know that wasn't very long, but I want to keep the sim moving as well. Hope you had some good conversations in your groups. What key questions did your group talk about in regard to asking other area superintendents that have experience with rebounding or a mentor?
Alan, you typed in everything you want to
No,
speak for us?
yeah, they went into the chat. We had a bunch of questions. We said, what role did transparency have in helping you make a decision? You can cut and paste them from the chat if you wanted to.
Yeah, they're not popping up for me yet. So
Of course, they're in the group chat. That's why. When we broke out as groups, they're in the group chat.
Yeah, I kept waiting for them. So I put a note there, waiting for chats, but you're right. You're right. They're in the group chats.
So I can read them to you if you'd like. So we want to know the role of transparency in making the decision.
I'll clean these up in a moment.
Yeah, we wanted to know if there were other options besides rebounding. They don't like that word, by the way, in spell check.
Yeah, I see that.
And how did they avoid a desegregation lawsuit? But something that just came to my mind after we spoke was that we really don't know what the demographics of the district are currently. So we're talking about desegregation, but we don't know if it's really an issue in the community.
Good point. Those are good. Any other ones that came?
You know, this is Sarah. I'm just occurred to me because the scenario mentioned the possibility of more Hispanic people coming into the district. What would be the impact, you know, educationally and financially, if you have to provide services to students who are English language learner or who need bilingual services? What is the impact of that?
That's a great question.
There's another question with regard to Hispanic, and that is, who are the Hispanics? Hispanics are not monolithic. Therefore, you know, you could have Central Americans coming in and Mexicans, and who are these Hispanics? Unfortunately, we try to pigeonhole them all too often, and it could be a very diverse Hispanic community coming in as well, and that also has an impact on the district.
It may be a racial situation, just anticipating that those people seeking those jobs are going to be Hispanic.
Well, we had also mentioned, are there any previous attitudinal issues that were prevalent in the community? We wondered, are there other businesses anticipating coming into the community in addition to? What stakeholders had other superintendents engaged with, or what other stakeholders, and might there be some overlap? You know, what health services may be, or additional health services may be needed for a community that's emerging like this?
Yeah, these are all, we could continue to go on and on, but the point in this particular question development, which you guys brought up stuff I hadn't even thought of yet, which is the benefit to this, right? Not frequently does a superintendent get to pause and say, wow, give me a group to even ask the right questions that could help me navigate a complex situation like this. So, you know, when my students go and become superintendents or district leaders, they might be the one telling the superintendent, here's a great question we have to think about, if they're not the superintendent themselves even. So clearly.
And maybe to just to play the devil's advocate, we keep talking about all the negative things, but why not consider what would be the benefits of such a move?
Yeah, there's a lot of districts out there across our great country that would say, hey, we'll take any population growth, right? Because ours is declining. 100%. Great point. And thank you for the feedback on this. These are great questions, and I was typing as fast as I could hear you. So let's proceed just for the sake of the simulation, see where we go next.
Over the next few weeks, the City Council has the first hour of their meetings open for public comment. The community response is significant, and the Council hears positive and negative input on both parcels. It seems that opening this issue to public comment has resulted in little insight, but heightened public involvement. You hope that opening the debate has provided the public an opportunity to feel engaged, but you suspect that engagement does not necessarily equate with satisfaction. Perhaps you may have minimized the public concern by simply recommending one of the sites and moving forward. The Council finally thanks the public for their input and then, in a closed session, votes to approve Parcel A.
Okay. So again, trying to be transparent and get input, we did, whether people agreed or not. And the vote we now know, which we can plan ahead with, is Parcel A, which was the original location of the new elementary school.
With the location for the new school now set, you schedule a work session with the school board to try to finalize plans for the new district boundaries. You share with the board the city planning maps and location for the new elementary school that will be closer to the new meatpacking plant than any other school. The board is concerned that the student population of this new elementary school will primarily be those qualifying for free or reduced lunch and disproportionately Hispanic. Several of the board members expressed concerns that the changes being considered will have a significant impact on budgets. A debate ensues that includes costs associated with busing, staffing, ELL, and possible migration to the charter school in the city. Then, as if it's some invisible signal, all eyes turn to you, and the chair asks, "What do you suggest, Superintendent?"
This is why we're getting paid the big bucks, right? So now it always comes back to finances, right? Maybe not always, but certainly a consideration that you knew would come up in a situation like this sooner or later. So here we are. We have options around kind of being put on the hot seat here. And they're asking you maybe next steps here. We need to find a way to minimizing busing impacts or costs, a financial implication there. Growth in the area will take care of funding, meaning student enrollment growth and perhaps more funding for the school. Let's consider further input from the community, or just in general, don't lose focus here and let's keep the focus on some of the other factors before we think about the cost implications. Perhaps no perfect scenario here, but we have 4 options to pick from. So I'm going to leverage the poll again. What option collectively do we think is best?
Can I make a comment while people are doing that?
Yeah.
I think this is a failure. I hate to be a downer on it, but as soon as, when you have the city council involved, as soon as they make a decision behind closed doors, the whole plan is finished. And if you were in a state like Florida, for example, that has very strict sunshine laws, the city council members would be under arrest.
It's a good point.
Why would they be under arrest?
Open meetings laws.
For violating open meetings law. We just had that in our city here. Three council members were arrested and went to trial.
Yeah, and even though that might happen with the city council, there's implications for the school district, right? Regardless if they've done everything correct.
Sure. You can't have public input and then go behind closed doors and make a decision. Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster. That's not leadership.
So in our option here, in regard to the school board response, we have, the majority has suggested, and this was a close call here, 29, 18, 18, and 35%, that option 4 is our best option here. So let's choose option 4 and see where this choose our own adventure takes us.
Melissa Johnson, Senior Director of Admissions for the local hospital and board member, speaks up and says, I think it's easy for us to start down the wrong rabbit hole. Costs, inconvenience, squeaky wheels all have a tendency to draw us in wrong directions. I suggest that our primary concern remains a viable curriculum, excellent instructional resources, and active and accurate assessment tools. Equity in each of these areas across all of our schools needs to be kept front and center.
Great point.
After hours of discussion, they finalize a plan to bus half of the students near the new elementary to 2 other elementary schools and bus other students from around the community to this new elementary so that it's proportional in socioeconomic status and race to other buildings in the district. You know this will make it easier to staff the new school with teachers and administrators.
So interesting there. So now we know a couple things. We've kind of prioritized diversifying this school or trying to make that more equal. But we also know that that's potentially going to bring up parent concerns because, again, students may not be going to their neighborhood school if they're ones chosen to bus. And but we also have this new factor in here that we have to staff that school. And so you think by making it more equitable, at least your student population, perhaps it's indicating it might be easier to staff with voluntary or involuntary transfers. Now, let me draw to your attention up here in our top right corner here again. Our city council satisfaction has declined. Our board is still fairly satisfied, and our parents and our staff at this point are moderately satisfied. So it's keeping an eye on our stakeholder populations.
The board moves forward and finally agrees to new boundaries and a minimal busing plan for the coming school year. They then turn to you and say, let's make this happen as painlessly as possible. Don't you wish it was just that easy? After finalizing plans with the board to release the new district boundaries, you present the redistricting plan to the city. They voice support for the new boundaries and express appreciation for your efforts to equalize the elementary buildings.
Now notice we just got popped up here. We just got a new phone message. So let's go down here and see what the phone message might be.
You get the following phone message. I work graveyard shift at the casino here in town, and I usually get home from work at 7:30 a.m. I'm a single parent, and my 3 children, twin daughters age 5 and son 7, have to be at the school just around the corner by 8:15 a.m. So that leaves me just enough time to get them ready and out the door for school at 8 a.m. With the proposed new boundaries, my children will now have to be bused to a school 20 minutes from here and have to leave by 7:30 a.m. to catch the bus. Unfortunately, there are 5 others at the casino that have similar problems. Can't you please make an exception for our children and allow them to continue attending the school just down the street? Otherwise, I'm going to have to hire someone to help out.
It's a little personal.
After finalizing plans with the board to release the new district boundaries, you present the redistricting plan to the city. They voice support for the new boundaries and express appreciation for your efforts to equalize the elementary buildings. You feel good about your choices to this point, but recognize that there is yet a great deal of opposition. Thus, you anticipate that the next board meeting will be longer than normal, with both staff and parents wanting to address the board. You realize that there will not be sufficient time to allow every person to have as much time as they want to address the board.
So in thinking about our next board meeting, this is normally for a superintendent where the board meeting may get moved from the boardroom to the auditorium or the gym, whether it's COVID or not, or maybe a Zoom session here. So we have to think through that. So keep track of our dashboard up here as we monitor that, and let's see what our next choice is.
Who should notify the public of the guidelines around public comments at the board meeting?
So realizing that this could get a little bit heated and people will be passionate about the topic now. I love this one when it comes to my school law class, because it's really who's keeping the meeting on track. And I want to acknowledge that this could be different in different states. But the question here is, who notifies the public of the guide rounds on public comment? That could be how they get the opportunity to speak, how long they have to speak, and if there'll be a response from the board or not. I guess I'll just open this one up to any feedback or direction that the group has in best option here.
Wouldn't that normally be the board's secretary's responsibility?
It is normally in Iowa, I can speak in Iowa, it's the board secretary and the board president that are to keep the meeting on topic and agenda. So
that would be consistent with New York City when we had school districts in New York City.
In my experience, something like that would always be the board president who is in charge of the meeting and who would lay out the ground rules. And if there was ever a challenge or a question, that's when the school attorney would step in.
Others want to weigh in on this one? How it would be handled in your state? I would suggest in the majority, it's going to be the board president who's going to notify the public of that. And I know sometimes this can change based on who's in the audience. You know, if there's 40 people, it might be 2 or 3 minutes max, versus if it's 3 to 5 people, maybe they'll allow for 5 to 10 minutes. So I think the board president is the appropriate response in most cases.
At the school board meeting, approximately 40 parents fill the boardroom with requests to speak. They all sign up and are notified by the board president that they will each be given 3 minutes to address the board. One by one, parents and community members plead with the board to reconsider the proposed new boundaries. The board listens and takes notes. A businessman comes to the pulpit and says, "I have to question the costs associated with busing in terms of both money and time. Having our 3 children each on buses for 40 minutes each day just seems wasteful when they have been walking to the school in under 10 minutes. Then there are the increased costs of the buses, maintenance, fuel, drivers, insurance, etc. That's a sizable tax increase to be piling on the good citizens of Ridge Valley. There must be less expensive ways of addressing the problems you claim we'll face."
Parent brings up some really good points.
A professionally dressed woman takes the microphone and adds, "The location proposed for the new elementary school is probably the easiest solution for the city council, but certainly not best for our children. The smell and large vehicular traffic alone make it undesirable for a school. With a little effort, I'll bet you could have identified and zoned a location that could also eliminate the need for busing."
Almost wanting to reopen it and look at another location here.
A young mother of 2 addresses the board and says, "My 2 children, 6 and 8 years old, have already come to me crying that they are not going to be with their friends in the next school year. My 6-year-old is scared to go to a strange school and wants to stay home. My 8-year-old son, who has always gotten along well with others, is beginning to have nightmares and has started acting out, fighting with the neighborhood boys. The emotional trauma is a concern to us."
So can you just imagine? I mean, I'm just hearing people speak up now, and there could be 12, 15 different other issues that are personal and probably legitimate. But now the heartstrings are starting to be tugged on a little bit in regard to the tough decision for the district.
Trent, just a quick question.
The board thanks the public for their comments and informs them that they will review the feedback they received tonight at their next work session before voting on the new boundaries in a couple of meetings.
And sorry, I interrupted somebody there, so go ahead.
No, I just want there's 2 governing bodies involved in this, which makes it a little bit more complicated. So just for clarification for my own head, the city council would be involved in only where the location of the new school would be, but the school board would make the decision on any kind of rezoning.
They rebounding, yes.
Rebounding, rezoning, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
So basically there's 2. Once the city council approves a site for the new school, pretty much the city council is out of this, correct?
That is correct. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Nope, great point there. And I just want to, again, bring your attention up here to the top. We've lost a little bit of, what do I want to say, peace of mind for the city council here, or at least their stress level has climbed a little bit there. So let's keep that in mind.
Some people in the district seem to be okay with some elementary schools being more segregated than others. How is this boundary scenario similar to the Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka situation? Why might having one school more segregated than another be lawful or unlawful?
Now, I love these. And the next slide, by the way, not to give it away, is this one's asking, how is this scenario potentially similar to Brown versus Board of Ed and desegregating public schools? The next one says, how is this scenario different? Just so you know. And part of the reason we built this in is because of what I mentioned when we started that sim today. And that's, how do you force students that are going to live some of these scenarios to apply prior Supreme Court cases and applications of segregation? So again, this one is, how is Brown versus Board of Ed? Even if you're not an expert on that particular case, you can click on it and learn more. How is the scenario you're living here similar? And the next slide will ask, how is it different? And so for the last time in our simulation today, I'm going to break you into different groups and ask you to consider those two questions just briefly. And I was going to say put it in the chat, but I know if I ask you to put it in the chat, it won't populate to me. And so somebody jot those down, and I'll just get a few responses when we come back. How is boundarying that you're living right now at Ridge Valley similar to Brown versus Board of Ed? And how is it different? I'll give you about 5 minutes to keep our sim on track here. And hopefully you can meet some different people in this discussion group. Angelica and Sandra, are you there? Okay, welcome back, everybody. I tried to jump in a couple different groups there and got a little feedback already. For time's sake, I'm going to keep us going here a little bit, but here are a couple questions that came up in regard to how Brown versus Board of Ed was a similar goal of making sure schools have a balanced or desegregated population. Similar busing issues were a challenge for Topeka schools. Somebody share out any other similarities that you talked about in your group.
I think the pivotal issue in Brown v. the Board of Education was based on, can you have separate but equal schools?
Yep.
And I don't know if balance was as much of an issue as the whole issue of equality. And I think that was the pivotal issue back then.
I agree with Don. It was the issue was separate but equal, which is, after the Brown case is no longer an option.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that, and one of the things that we talked about in our group was I brought up the issue of de jure segregation versus de facto segregation.
Mm-hmm.
And it appears to me, and I may be wrong, I know Trent, you teach school law, that de jure segregation is not legal. So if the school board, for example, were to roll out a plan that resulted in a segregated school or a largely segregated school, that might even be illegal.
Yes.
So, yeah. So I think that, I think if you're asking how is it similar, I think that, therein lies the similarity for me that, the Brown versus Board of Education, which was found that what was it? The Establishment Clause of the First Amendment was found to be illegal. That you can't have separate but equal. And in this particular case, I think the school board and the superintendent, along with the community, have to be sure that whatever plan that they decide on doesn't result in some disparity, some segregation that results from that. So I think there's a similarity for me.
Yeah, well said, James. I mentioned there, I just jotted down with the school offers things such as similar curriculum opportunities, because even though you're not talking about separate but equal, you do have two elementaries now that you want to make sure, especially if you do the rebounding, that there's similar opportunities and curriculum at both. And then to your de jure segregation point, again, if they made a decision that was unlawful, they'd have to correct that and have an action plan if it was challenged. So that's really a great point. Again, for time's sake, I'm going to jump to the next one that perhaps you talked about.
How is this boundary scenario different from the Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka?
Thank you for the narration. Just a couple quick points that you also talked about. Obviously, lots of differences here, but some notable ones that you brought up in your group.
Well, the notable one is the fact that in the Brown case, it was all generated by race.
Yeah.
And you could argue this had ostensibly nothing to do with race.
Yeah, free and reduced versus race. Good. Yeah, I think that's the obvious one, right? And if we get into the details of this and you actually read the case, I think you generate, others. But again, this is the benefit to forcing students to understand the Brown versus Board and Plessy versus Ferguson cases, quite honestly, and apply it, or at least learn from the implications of that so they don't make those same mistakes when they're applying the boundaries and the segregation, addressing the segregation issues in this particular scenario. We have about 8 or 10 minutes left, so I'm going to keep pushing through just so we can get some resolution and sleep okay tonight handling this simulation. So here we go.
As you think about staffing the new school building, you plan on following the district staffing plan, which includes asking current elementary staff for volunteers who might want to move to the new building before involuntarily moving staff. District policy gives the superintendent and human resources director authority to create a staffing plan with consideration to longevity in the district, certification, and staff requests. What factors will you consider in deciding which staff to involuntarily transfer if needed?
So this is pretty real, right? So we went from boundaries and segregation topics to now staffing the new building. I'm sure you all have staffing plans that you could pull out and reference. I would challenge students, if I was teaching this, to do the same or look up their own staffing plan in their district that they're probably not aware of. Notice that if there may be, we don't know, but there'd be voluntary transfers probably already. But the question asked is, what would you consider on involuntary transfers that's left up to the superintendent? So I will open it up for insights and put a few notes down here on involuntary transfers and factors that you'd consider.
I'd consider balance. Is there a particular need in a particular school? For example, if there was a high percentage of Hispanic children, that I might want to transfer a teacher who spoke Spanish in that to that school. Also, in terms of level, you know, if you have teachers at the elementary level that are specialists in early childhood, you know, is there a need there? So I would just say, based on, you know, what I would see the open needs are of that school.
Specifics. Great. Anybody that's lived this that can offer some insights on transfers and factors to consider?
I mean, I opened a new school in one district that I completely rezoned, and when it came, we did this identical thing. We had volunteers, and then the involuntary came at the end. But what I did it anonymously, because principals very often take offense if a teacher requests to be transferred. So we didn't want to create that. So we did it anonymously in envelopes. And I sat at a table with the teacher union president and her vice president, and had them open up the envelopes. Mm-hmm. And then we put together the staff in terms of need. You know, do we have enough teachers that could teach, you know, K2 versus, you know, do we have some teachers that are good at, you know, the upper grades or have more experience at the upper grades? And, you know, that worked out really, really well, because there was no hanky-panky. You know, the teachers had trust that the union president was involved in opening up those transfer requests.
Very transparent. Good point. Okay, so we got some options there, and again, this is a whole nother chapter on staffing, right? That we could discuss and learn from.
As the year goes on, the plans for the upcoming school year with new boundaries settles in with students, staff, and parents. Many appreciate the ongoing communication from the district and collaboration between the school district and community. Others are still not happy and feel that it's unfair their children will be spending more time on a bus. In an effort to address the remaining concerns, the school board decides to make a public comment agreeing to monitor the impact of the new boundaries and review and respond to staff and parent feedback next school year.
Probably a really good idea.
You are relieved that you have a plan ready for implementation, but you're not completely sure what level of acceptance it has throughout the community. You indicated to several of your key stakeholders that you would monitor results and review the plan next year. What evidence will you monitor to see how the new boundaries are working in the coming year? Choose all that apply.
So again, this isn't an exhaustive list at all, but you know, the question at hand is, we've promised the community and parents we're going to continue to monitor the implications of the rebounding and potentially make changes. So you could check all of these that could advise your ongoing decisions. But again, it's going to force participants to think about which ones might be most important to watch. So again, any feedback on which one of these you'd monitor to make any changes on rebounding and monitor the implications? One thing I see right up front here is you could do different surveys for students, staff, and parents, but perhaps you want to, review a community input and let them choose, if they're responding as a parent or a community member or a staff member. Obviously, maybe letters to the editors, especially if they're anonymous. At least I wouldn't put a ton of stock in those, even though you might read them and lose sleep over them. Climate survey data, especially if you do something that you have previous data on, might be something that is impactful to watch. By the way, might go up and be more positive too, based on the changes you've made. Parent complaints, obviously, school board and who's speaking at school board meetings should be a good barometer if this is an ongoing issue. So don't want to suggest that all of these are the same of importance, but you could certainly track all of these as you monitor the outcomes of this rebounding scenario.
The following is a list of resources.
So again, just some resources here, everything from Brown versus Board again to race, segregation, social justice, and PD on the topics at hand that we've explored. So that rounds out.
You have completed the simulation. Let's now review your responses and outcomes. On the following screens, you will be presented with performance indicators that result from the choices you made and detailed feedback for each of the choice options you selected. You may print and review the feedback. If this simulation is part of a group activity, be prepared to discuss your feedback during the simulation debrief portion of the program.
We just have 2 minutes left. So as I'm trying to pull this together for us, so you've got the full experience with this particular sim, I want to mention that the feedback that students get, and I'll click on that in a moment to see, is aligned to the national PESL standards, professional standards for educational leaders, which is nice because a lot of our programs are probably aligned to that. So I want to acknowledge that there is alignment there. The other thing I just want to mention as before I close here, and I'll pull that up. So here's your scorecard, and then it'll go through each particular choice that we were forced to make in the sim and talk about, kind of negotiate what your options are and what perhaps better options could or would be. So I think there's some teaching, even though the simulation is over at this point, there's some reteaching and discussion that goes into the feedback, or what they call the scorecard on this sim and all the others that you might engage with. And so I'm going to stop there just for time's sake. And I hope that you found this simulation valuable today. I promised that I'd engage you, and you weren't going to sit and get on this Zoom session. So thank you for your engagement. This is unsolicited, so I'll say this, and as I turn it over to Ken again, I've been a partner with Ken and School Simulations for multiple years. And I love our partnership because they continue to evolve and innovate and support K-12 leaders. I've created lots of sims with them and hope to create even more sims down the road. So I just want to mention that unsolicitedly, they're great partners to develop sims that are meaningful for you. And I really do think I've seen firsthand the implications of using them to develop school leaders, which I think we could all agree is really important in this day and age. So thanks for engaging this afternoon, and hopeful it was a powerful activity. Ken?
That's great. Thank you, Trent. And it's been great working with you as well. And thank you all for participating. We are obviously at the end of our time. Please, we will be sending out you will get the recording to the webinar, of the webinar into your email. And in that, you'll actually see where there's an offer for, if you'd be interested in having us come in to facilitate a session with your program or with your district. We're happy to do so, and we'd love to engage with you on that. Also interested in your feedback. So please feel free to reply to emails from us and let us know what you thought of the program. And if, as Trent mentioned, we are always looking to, there's no shortage of experiences that leaders require having, right? There's no limitation on every experience can be valuable. And our goal is to make sure that when we create a sim, that it's authentic, it's inspired by somebody's actual experience. And at the same time, it may not be your school, it may not be your district, but we want it so that as the participant goes through it, it could be. And so from an engagement perspective, from the application of what's going on, both in the exercise, but also to oneself, that's where the magic happens. So please feel free to reach out to us, to any of us on the team. I'm at kspiro@schoolsims.com. It's SPERO, and would love to hear from you. And I very much look forward to working with you all moving forward.
And Trent,
if anybody's interested, to ask questions now, but with respect to time, if you need to go, obviously you need to go. So sorry, I interrupted somebody.
You know, I just said to Ken and Trent that this is a terrific tool. I really enjoyed this. I think it's really has a lot of value. I love it. I really love it. I don't necessarily agree with what you think are the answers, but you know, but I think it's just a terrific tool, and I look forward to using it.
That's great, and that's the beauty of it, right? It's okay to disagree because we're not, you know, we distinguish between how we teach and what we learn from instruction versus what we learn from experience. If I'm going to teach you, I'll teach you what I need you to know. On the other hand, when it comes to experience, we can learn from the negative as well as from the positive, because I can disagree with it, and that's actually going to be meaningful to me and actually memorable potentially. And so that is a valuable component, and then we can talk about it. So that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, and at Toro College, we're looking forward to our onboarding on December 3rd with Dr. DeJong. And thank you, Trent, for this introduction to the Sims.
You're welcome. Thanks for being on today, Alan.
Thank you.
See, I'm in the same program as Alan, so I'm going to get to do this. So this is I really look forward to it.
Look forward to having you.
Be well. Take care.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ken. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Trent. That was great. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, great job. Thank you.
And you got it recorded, Brian?
I do. I'll stop it now and yeah, I'll get it up and out later on today.